Well, welcome to this International Ministerial Fringe conference titled, Why Does Gender Matter and How Are Women and Youth Leading Peacebuilding Efforts? I'm going to invite Sister Tracy DeMarco, who's the Europe North Area Advisor for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, whose building we're in, to just come and welcome us, and then we'll commence with the first panel.
Thank you, Sam. I want to welcome all our visitors and delegates today. We're so grateful that you have come and shared your stories with us and helped us recognise our brothers and sisters that are affected by religious intolerance and violence. We have heard your stories, we have felt your stories, we have marvelled at your bravery, your courage, your conviction, and we have prayed that these experiences that are felt across the world will stop. You are the peacemakers. Today we are surrounded by peacemakers. Jesus Christ is recorded in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9 as saying, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." So we have delegates from across the globe who have devoted their lives to peace with us today, who know that women and the very young are disproportionately suffering from the ravages of war and religious persecution. We welcome you in the spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood, whatever your faith, belief, or non-belief. And it is our privilege today to offer this house of worship for this community event, this event with global significance. And yet, there is a dissonance. With murders taking place in the name of God, believers slaughtering believers who believe differently, and those who choose a secular path, clearly something is significantly wrong. Over 80% of the world's inhabitants live in countries where there are restrictions on religious practice and belief. We need to do better. We face turmoil. We hear heart-wrenching stories, especially concerning atrocities against the most vulnerable, women and children. But we can and we must have hope. There is a solution. We find it as we focus on universal values that unite us all. These are ageless values. For those of us who believe in a deity, we may describe them as eternal values from the God who gives us life. This is the basis for action, values-based action. In Scripture, held sacred across faith traditions, we read of the great commandment to love others as ourselves. This is our great call to action today. As we embrace this religious and moral principle to treat others as we would like to be treated ourselves, as we advocate for peace, kindness, and respect for all, change can happen. Imagine a world where this cruelty and abuse was eradicated. This is the world I want for my children and my grandchildren. This is the world we all want. This is the world we all deserve. So, we must live our values and focus on the simple steps we can take individually and organisationally to help build understanding between all members of the human family, regardless of their religious beliefs or non-beliefs. We must teach these values and principles to our children to ensure discrimination and prejudice ends. We acknowledge and are grateful for all the hard work and effort that has gone before us, and we look forward with renewed conviction and determination to assist in making religious freedom and human dignity a fundamental right for us all. And in accordance with my religious beliefs, I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Now ask our first panel to come and sit at the front. We apologize we weren't able to remove these, so we hope you can see everybody. We're going to have to do our best. So we have Helen Fisher, who's a global gender persecution specialist for Open Doors. We have Audrey Kitagawa from the International Academy of Multicultural Cooperation. We have Healy Yor from Afghan Women Welfare and Development Association. Dishani Jayawiraj, am I pronouncing that right, Dishani? Who's with us from Sri Lanka. She's the co-founder of the Center for Peacebuilding and Reconciliation. I think Kimberly Orr from University of Notre Dame Law School. So please come forward, and we're going to be starting our day with a discussion of why gender and youth matters in freedom of religion or belief and conflict. So I'm going to ask each of these really distinguished women who are all doing such incredible work in different parts of the world to begin with a short introduction to themselves and a kind of opening statement on why does gender matter. And following that, I may pose a few questions, but also we'll open the floor to you to ask questions. So be thinking of those. We'll begin with Helen Fisher from Open Doors.
Well, hello, everyone. Greetings on this fine day. Thank you for coming to talk about what is quite a difficult topic. I think we'll all agree as we come through the day. Some of us are very familiar with it. I've been working in the religious persecution field for 15 years and for 10 years in the field of looking at first women and religious persecution and then gender and religious persecution. In my role in Open Doors International, we went from a situation where we were hearing terrible stories of things happening, especially to the women and the girls of our religious population. But very often they were too easily dismissed as, well, that's anecdotal, or that's just in that country. Well, if you understood the specificities of that country, you'd understand how exceptional it was. That wasn't very helpful for trying to have a discussion about the accumulated vulnerabilities, for example, for a 14-year-old girl who has an age vulnerability because of her dependency, but she also has a gender vulnerability in the country that she's living in, which would not have the same rights and freedoms, for example, as here in the UK. In 2018, however, we began to do global research across 50 countries to look at what these two together look like. Now, I was hoping that we might have a PowerPoint slide shown as we look at this, because what we're essentially looking at is where human rights or human rights violations overlap, where they become compounded in somebody's life. So the men and women, boys and girls of the church may all face particular restrictions due to FoRB violations, but the women and girls of the church will actually have greater gender vulnerabilities because they have fewer rights in their country because they were born as female. These squeeze in on her in a very painful manner, and this gender vulnerability becomes a means of religious oppression. We have to distinguish between means and motivation. So this is what I have been doing for 10 years, looking at how these different vulnerabilities are compounded systematically across all cultures, all backgrounds, because it's so deeply ingrained in our societies beyond whatever the actual dominant religion or culture is. We will go through the day and have so many opportunities to explore both what the problem is, but now I'm looking forward to hearing something about what some of the solutions are and what can be done when we empower these women and girls of the church to be part of strengthening communities and building peace specifically in conflict situations.
So we'll have Hila Yoon from the Afghan Women Welfare and Development Association, followed by Audrey Kitagawa from International Academy of Multicultural Cooperation, and then Kimberly, from the University of Notre Dame, and finally Dishani from the Center for Peacebuilding and Reconciliation. And I'm saying that so I don't have to keep getting up. So there we go.
Hi everyone. I don't have a formal speech, but I'm just gonna share my experience growing up in Afghanistan. And I want at the end of this conference that we all have something meaningful, like a meaningful outcome, and get to know more about each other and the work we have done. So why gender matter in conflict? This is something that's very important for a lot of Afghans because we have been living in war for more than 4 or 5 decades now. And right now, the situation of women in Afghanistan is really bad. Afghanistan is, I think now, it's the only country where women and girls don't have access to basic education. They are not allowed to study above 6th grade in Afghanistan. And when I grew up in Afghanistan, we faced a lot of gender bias, and because of our gender, and we have been through peace process, so many peace process, but often women are just sidelined because they think that we are not worthy enough to be in the peace process and peace building implementation. And that's why when I was in Afghanistan, I started my own organization called the Afghan Women Welfare and Development Association. Later on, we changed the name to Afghan Youth Ambassadors for Peace Organization. The reason why I started this organization because, and it's not just in Afghanistan, but in other countries as well, that they think that young people are often perpetrators of violence and not the change makers and the solution makers. And this is the concept and the thing that we wanted to change in our country. Because Afghanistan is a country where more than 60% of the population is youth, and often when it comes to peace building and any decision-making processes, we were just totally sidelined. And when I talk about youth, often young women are totally sidelined as well from decision-making processes. There is no intergenerational aspect in any decision-making processes or in peace-building processes. So that's why I started my own organization, and the focus of this organization was to support grassroots peace builders. Every time we talk about any resolution or peace-building processes or development, we always focus on the capital, but we never go to the local communities. We never talk to the grassroots peace builders. And this is something that often international community never focuses on. We always need to start from a bottom to top approach when it comes to any peace-building implementation or any development. So when I started my organization, the focus was totally on how we can support young women peace builders who are the advocate and leaders of their own community. Women are not only the victims of war, we are also the change makers. So a lot of international community who go to these countries for women development or thinking that, oh, gender really matters in peace processes or in conflict. Of course it matters because women experience war differently. And we always, when it comes to peace building and any decision-making processes, women will have different solution. We will have different perspective when it comes to any decision or any solution for sustainable peace in any country. That's why gender is so important in any peace processes or decision-making processes. And it shouldn't be symbolic either. Like, we've seen so many peace processes that, they keep saying that, okay, we need to involve women. They're here at the round tables. They have panel discussion. But that's very symbolic. What we need is meaningful participation. What we mean is that we should be there in every decision-making processes from very start to the very end. When men start war, women are there to provide solution and end war. And it's very important that in every peace process and everything, women should be meaningfully involved. And we don't need others to come here and rescue us. We are our own change makers. We can provide solution to our own problems. And there are so many young women and especially young people in different conflict-affected countries who are bringing changes to their own local communities. What is lacking is that they don't have the right platform. Often there is the language barriers, there is no funding for them, there is no opportunity for them to actually speak. And this is something that we need to tackle. If there is language barrier, we need to find solution for these language barriers. Language barriers shouldn't be the only barrier that we say, okay, that because they don't speak English, that doesn't mean that we don't need to provide them the right opportunity to speak in panel discussion like these. And I'm sure there are more qualified peacemakers like me in different countries that who can speak about their problems and their solution. But what is lacking is what the problem is the language barrier. And this is something that we need to tackle. And at the same time, providing the opportunities, the funding opportunities for women organization is really important. And this, I'll give more information about this later on because we have so many panel discussion later on, and you guys can join me later in room 101. We're presenting Akwe as well, and unfortunately we can have more discussion about what solution we can actually bring to these problems, and especially in conflict-affected countries. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and I wish to extend my deepest appreciation to the organizers of this panel for the privilege to be with all of you this morning. And I want to address specifically the issue of gender importance in FoRB and conflict issues. So this aspect of conflict, which is raised previously by our previous two speakers, and especially I have taken to heart with a speaker, this beautiful young lady just before me indicated that the importance of the local engagement, and that is very important. And I think it gives us insight into whether or not the international legal instruments really are enforceable and how they can be enforced. However, I speak from the perspective of a lawyer, and of course, so international legal instruments are very important. So I wanted to share with you, with respect to the international level and the international legal instruments, a very seminal UN resolution. And although we are talking about a leading guiding institution creating these legal instruments, I think it's important for all of us to know that prior to the rise of the UN, the creation of the UN 70 plus years ago, these international legal instruments were non-existent. So it's very important for us to be able to see the context and the legal framework, which also encompasses the judicial processes in the importance of being able to recognize and bring forth the importance of women. And as we have these experienced people who understand what conflict does to women on the ground, I think it is important for us to become familiar with UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And the reason why I bring it up is because it's so important to understand that this really was a landmark UN Security Council resolution that specifically addressed the importance of women's full participation and equal participation in conflict resolution, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and in post-conflict situations and reconstruction. And I think therein is immediately the recognition of the importance of the role of women in these peace processes, in conflict processes, and post-conflict resolution. And the importance of this resolution also specifically created measures to protect women and girls from conflict-related sexual violence and outlines related responsibilities of the United Nations in different political and programmatic areas. Now, I think it has been recognized that sexual violence against women have been utilized as a tool against civilians to instill fear within them. And this kind of behavior needs to be brought to the forefront of our consciousness so that we can create remedies and address the situation. But the resolution, the importance of the resolution is that it provided a global framework within which to mainstream gender in all peace processes, including peacekeeping, peace building, and post-conflict reconstruction destruction, as well as in the general maintenance of peace and security. So immediately, this resolution lifted up the prominence and importance of women in all these aspects of peace. And as we see what is going on in the world today, not only in Ukraine, but in other countries where war is existent, we actually can see the importance of having the international legal instruments created so that we can have that global framework to start the adjudicative processes and include the judiciary, the laws, etc. Hopefully that it will also filter into the member states that have signed on to this and are compelled under international law to be able to start the implementation. And in that aspect also, have the importance of the member states begin the enforcement processes so that people on the ground will be able to have this legal context to look at and to find enforceability. So, with respect to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, because the sustainable development and the role of women as well as religious communities are hugely important, and this aspect of gender equality that must permeate through our international work becomes really significant. But I just wanted to call your attention to the fact that even though the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals is important, and it recognizes that gender equality, especially in SDG number 5, is extremely important, neither the gender equality in SDG 5 nor SDG 16, which addresses peace, justice, and strong institutions, explicitly references women, peace, and security. And so as we have an opportunity to listen to the experiences of women today, and we must always remember, what are the contexts of the rules of law? We also have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What are the intersectionalities where we may have seemingly contradictory or polarizing points between the human rights agenda and freedom of religion and belief? So this kind of analysis, deeper analysis, is very important for us to undertake. And I highly am very interested in how this is all going to be expressed and heard about, shared about throughout the day. So I thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today and to hear your stories, your experiences, your perspectives, and points of view, because we have to continuously dilate the lens of insularity and expand into the global mind and heart. And so thank you so much for being with you this morning.
Good morning. I too would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity, and also my distinguished members of the panel. So my background is in immigration law. I have served as an asylum officer in the United States, in which I have had the opportunity to interview hundreds of women and children, people who have been persecuted by on account of their religion and their gender. And then I continued to study at the Kehoe School of Global Affairs at Notre Dame to focus on the gaps in international law and refugee protections, which are very, very significant and most predominantly impact women and children, and also persons of religious minorities, particularly in conflict-affected zones. This is because the 1951 Convention on Refugees is the last iteration of the what it constitutes to be a refugee. And so it was created in response to World War II and has significant gaps that have not been that are not recognized in international law. That includes conflict, civil war, and it also includes individual domestic violence, the type of most of the harms that are perpetrated against women and children. And also my focus has been on climate change and climate migration, which is also a significant gap and also exacerbates conflict, and it also exacerbates kind of this gap in protections for women and children. So the effects of climate change intensify internal and cross-border geoconflict flashpoints. In the Middle East and North Africa, about 60% of surface water resources are transboundary, and all countries share at least one aquifer, mounting potential for conflict over increasingly scarce resources. Desertification in the Sahel region of Africa and many other parts of the world push cattle herders beyond their typical boundaries in search of usable land, sparking violent clashes with farming communities. These issues underlie, in part, why nearly half of the countries with the highest number of ecological threats are among the 40 least peaceful countries, including Afghanistan and Syria, Iraq, Chad, India, and Pakistan. This climate change and conflict exacerbate existing inequalities among low-income and marginalized populations, which include women, children, and religious minorities. Disadvantaged groups are more exposed to the adverse effects of climate and conflict. They're more susceptible to the physical and financial damage caused by climate change and conflict, and they're less able to cope and recover from the disasters that are a result from climate or conflict. The women in particular represent about 70% of the 1.3 billion people living in conditions of poverty. They're proportionately more dependent on threatened natural resources, have limited participation in decision-making, and those who are often, as was stated, included in a more symbolic manner in decision-making processes. They have limited access to environmental management benefits, and they're also 14 times more likely to be injured or killed by disasters than men. These differential effects also are distinctly attributable to race and ethnic inequalities as well as religious identity. And so, and that is before they're forcibly displaced. And so those are the issues that exist in those countries, whether they're internally displaced or whether they are forced to move cross-boundary. All these inequalities are exacerbated, and harms continue to occur along the path to trying to find new homes, and are exacerbated once they are in their homes. The vulnerabilities of being women or children or religious identity are forcing people into spaces in which they don't have protections. And so these are significant gaps in the international law that we have. And all academics and practitioners alike know that state that it's going to take a lot of creativity and really good new thinking within the peace-building processes, including involving the most impacted people in those processes to be able to confront this issue. So I think that panels like today and the people we will hear from today will be the type of people we need to be able to confront some of these really significant issues that are facing the world today. So thank you so much.
Good morning. I'm Dishani Javeda, representing Center for Peace Building and Reconciliation, Home for Diversity in Sri Lanka. I think my other co-panel members are given a very rich overview of the issues as well as institutionalized justice systems. But I would really like to bring my story as a woman peacemaker, why gender matters, as well as youth matters, because I started my journey as a young woman. Center for Peace Building and Reconciliation has been founded by a man and a woman. Yes, I am one of them. So it started bringing masculine and feminine energies together in a balance. So in that process was not easy, but we both learn very deeply how we can support each other to balance masculine and feminine energies within ourselves. I think I see this, I see the issue of many, I see many issues in the world because of, it's happening because of a wrong design, which Homo sapiens designs for themselves, being human-centric. So in that design, where is the balance? So wherever we go, we talk about issues. So everything become an issue. So fear become the psyche of all governing systems and even our personal as well as social, cultural, global, whatever the levels. So then what went wrong needed to be really, I think, reflect in this juncture of human civilization. That's what I believe. Having that thinking base, starting with working with religious leaders from 4 faiths, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, and Islam, especially male religious leaders. We started with working with male religious leaders in 2003, and then very strategically started 2008 once we really understood the context and the needs of their more than the needs, their cultures. And sitting with 30 men as a woman, what I brought to the circle is feminine energy, feminine intuition, and feminine way of interpreting and engaging with conflict. So along that way, I learn and they learn, and not talking even anything related to gender. They learn through living with a woman, 4 days sometimes. Maybe it will be a conflict transformation workshop. Maybe it can be a dialogue. Maybe it can be a very, very political, deep dialogue. So in those moments, they realize, and I realized, where this imbalance is and how we can bring a balance. So I think in that process, then I learned in these institutions how women has been treated. Because we invited female religious leaders for the dialogues and trainings. But most of the time, female religious leaders saying most critical interpretations and the way they see and connect with religion. When we are having coffee, only with me. So then I'm asking, why you are not sharing it in the circle? And their facial impression says a deeper story. With youth and with other women and with community leaders, we can involve in that kind of situations. But when we work with religious institutions, it is very hard to break their rules. That's not our job there. So then we started in 2003 working with female religious leaders, starting with 10 female religious leaders from Christianity and Buddhist. And very first time I got to know that Islam also has female religious leaders, and they also learning 7 years in a school to be a Maulaviya, and then Maulaviyas and Hindu Matajis. That also very first time I met Hindu Matajis. And that was one of the best experience I ever had in my life, because I was able to understand the difference between religious literacy and spiritual literacy. And in that process was such a rich experience. And it's so we are adopting a very participatory approach to design our initiatives. While the mainly male-dominated religious leaders program called Apinam Religions for Humanity, remaining with only them and community leaders, the Women Religious Leaders Initiative has grown to working with women affected by diverse ways and young girls. And very recently, they started 2 another components, young women and women teachers. So we can see that how they connect with the world. because as soon as women are in peace building, they see always it as a whole community issue. So our female religious leaders work as connectors and healers of the communities as well as bridge makers. So in one conversation, one woman asked from me, Dishani, if women design a city, how it would look like? And it was such an interesting question. And then I added, we did that activity also. Okay, so let's think in this way. Women as well as who balance their feminine and masculine energies, men and children and youth, and differently able people come together and design a city, how it would look like. And it will be very different. So all the images came out is so different. And then we were planned to accommodate all and design a one city, but not practically, but in our imaginary world. So I would like to stop from there. It's city, and we'll think about a globe, how it would looks like. So we say that we are civilized, we are in a peak of civilization, but when we look at all our topics and why gender and youth matters in FoRB and conflict, is it a question to ask in a civilized situation, in a civilized human level? It's very obvious, not because they are victimized, because they are humans. They have a right to be a part of, to decide and design their life, their political, social, cultural, spiritual, and emotional, and ecological life. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm a bad chair because I was enjoying what I was hearing so much that I didn't call time on anyone. But I feel fed already and already excited to learn more throughout the day. We really don't have much time. I would like to just invite Helen Fisher back for a moment, just because we've finally got the PowerPoint working. And I think she has a couple of quite poignant things to say that will help to frame our thoughts really about some of the problems that we're trying to solve the rest of the day. And then I may just invite everybody else to have literally sort of a 30-second sort of, what's your 30-second statement before we move into the breakout groups.
Apologies, I'm not disappearing. Well, we've heard so much, haven't we? And I was struck when I was listening by the fact that back when I started doing this work, one of the first official pieces that I had found on this intersectionality was written in 2013 by the then Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, who pointed out that there was a gap created by a perceived antagonism between women's rights and freedom of religion or belief groups. And I'm so encouraged that today we have heard none of that. We have heard that women of faith work together, and that reinforces what he said, which is that these two rights are mutually reinforcing. And when you empower women and girls of faith, you actually empower the whole community. Now, this is a slide that you see behind me, which illustrates what I was referring to before. It's that squeeze represented in a person's life by both their rights as a person with beliefs or a religion, and that may be violated, and a person with perhaps varying gender rights in their society. And the fact that a vulnerability, a compound vulnerability, is created especially for women and girls of faith when they have a large number of violations of their rights as a human being because they are a woman or a girl. And of course, we could add to those orange arrows the vulnerabilities of age or of displacement. And if you've seen the reports outside of this room, we have studies on all of those, and I would encourage you to pick those up. We've also heard from my esteemed colleagues that some of the issues that we need to address are deeply uncomfortable for us. What we found in our study across Christian communities, we also know almost anecdotally to be true across other communities, Rohingya Muslims, Yazidis, the Uyghur Muslims. What do we find are the top tactics which are used around the world against men and women in distinguished ways? Well, the violence that men and boys experience as characteristic of religious persecution, as you can see, is quite visible. Physical violence, economic harassment, imprisonment by government, military and militia conscription. These attack men as providers in their communities, because this is often their role, and also if they are a religious leader. However, maybe you are struck, as we were, by what is characteristic of the persecution tactics used against women and girls, which is what we heard. The first one is sexual violence, and the second, forced marriage. The panel discussion in the main ministerial I was in just prior to this was giving testimony after testimony from specific countries of how that was the case. And this is extremely effective, especially because of the shame and the stigma which are associated with these, which means that even if a girl returns to her community, there is not the same sort of future which awaits her. Her value, her purpose, and her acceptance have been permanently damaged, not just because of what those outside the family think, but because the local faith community actually shares those ideas that somehow she is less of a person because of what has happened to her. So there is much that we can do as local faith actors. We can speak in places and environments like those provided by this ministerial. We can come together to work together on those shared human rights of freedom of religion or belief and women's rights, but we can also work within our own communities to reduce the extent to which shame and stigma will cause us to effectively perpetuate the damage. This is a fantastic opportunity for us to be peace builders, because this means that those who were perhaps viewed as victims of religious persecution are not objects of shame, but they're actors for peace. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to invite the other panelists if they want to say anything else for sort of literally just 30 seconds, and then we'll move into breakout groups. Thank you.
We just have 30 seconds. I just have one last thing to say, is that peace is not just the absence of war and conflict. Peace means where women and girls have the right to practice their basic human rights and have the freedom to have access to their basic right and education. Peace means where all people who have different religion can practice their faith and have that freedom of expression. Peace means where young people can have the freedom to think about their future and actually work for their future. So when we talk about peace, it just doesn't mean that we're not having war in a country. Peace is not just the absence of war, and this is something that I wanted to highlight whenever we talk about conflict and peace, but peace have different meanings as well. Thank you.
I'm very pleased that all of the discussants this morning have stressed the importance of women, and of course in the international legal instruments, in the local communities, within our own families, and all families globally. There is no question about the role of the importance of women in our everyday lives, in global legal instruments, and in all ways to be able to maintain peace and security on the global agenda in our local economies. And it is very important that we continue to move along the agenda for women to be able to be recognized as the forefronts of agents of transformation. So if we really want to be able to see communities and the whole world move towards a more peaceful place, the incorporation of women in all aspects of all disciplines, in all processes, must be fully incorporated. So, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And the women are definitely important peacemakers that must be recognized. So please continue our conversations. They're hugely important. And let us always remember at the forefront of our consciousness that we all have been birthed from the womb of women. So thank you.
I just wanted to affirm that what has been stated today is how the creative answers that our society needs will be formulated and are being formulated and will continue to be formulated. Displacement is going to increase. We have seen that conflict and violence is only increasing. It creates vulnerabilities within countries, which then creates regional vulnerabilities as people are displaced to just neighboring areas. And these are significant issues that must be addressed in a different way than it has been thus far. And the way that it needs to be addressed, I think, was really beautifully stated, particularly by Gila and Dashani with their personal experiences. Women are not victims. They have the answers. They have the experiences, and they need to be meaningfully included in international discussions, in local discussions. They need to be given resources and tools to be able to confront the issues that are confronting our societies and the world today. And so I just would like to thank those who are doing the very important work and encourage all others to contribute to this work, because it is exactly what I think our divine purposes are, and also what the world needs today. Thank you.
I have a wish. The wish is that we more oftenly focusing outputs of the conflicts, violent conflicts, but we are always forgetting the root causes. So root causes are very rarely taking to the conversation and discussions in global platforms as well as national platforms and well as community platforms. So the day we, as a conflict transformation practitioner, what I believe is that the day, because answers are with us, because root causes are with us in our political, economic, governing systems. So this faith-related violence is just output of it. So the day we, I hope that we all will get the courage which our founders of religions had. Jesus had. I'm a Buddhist, but Jesus one of my inspirations. So what Jesus had, the courage to operate from the place where justice and love sprouting. So that day, I think most of the conversations will be changing. Thank you.